If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. Today, I want to bring you up to speed on something that we've identified as a hidden challenge of work from home. And I think it's important that we talk about this challenge because most people that I hear from want to work from home. I've posted previously that most employees see work from home as a convenience, as a perk. Now, my question is it possible that work from home is not all upside? What if work from home presents challenges to our thriving? Now, I'm all about thriving, so I think you should know and be ready to address this challenge that Gallup is reporting in the work from home space. I think the challenge is one that we can deal with. We can face it with the proper ideas and techniques. So work from home can support our thriving rather than representing a challenge to it. For the record, I think work from home is generally good for people and generally good for companies. Now, situations vary, but in a work from home scenario, both sides save money, time, and stress. So why not take it on board? And in addition, and more subtly, work from home, I believe, forces managers to develop good managerial tactics, mostly because the bad ones don't work as well. And developing better managerial tactics is really good for everybody. So let's talk about the situation. So you probably know who Gallup is. Gallup is a research organization that does a lot of polling of people and really understands where people are at on a bunch of different topics. And lately, the branch of their research that I've been most aware of is the study of engagement. Now, when Gallup studies something, I have confidence in them because they get lots of data and they seem to know what they're talking about from a social science point of view. And so when they start talking about engagement in the workplace, then I perk up and listen. Engagement is a fairly 21st century buzzword, sort of. And it means people at work are engaged if they're generally positive about their work. It may be similar to passionate about their work. People that are engaged are happy to be there. They understand the purpose of their work. They give it good effort and don't have to be coerced into doing the things that need to be done. And generally, that's good for us to be engaged in our work rather than feeling like our work is some sort of a punishment or some sort of a drudgery that we just have to face and get through. I think that trying to deal with it as drudgery means that that's just an additional piece of stress that we're much better off not having to deal with. So we think of employee engagement as this positive thing in the workplace. Another issue that concerns Gallup and also concerns me is this notion of employee well-being. And it's not just employees, although Gallup does tend to study employees more than anybody else, near as I can tell. The notion of well-being is the notion that generally we're happy about our lives. And with work being such a big part of our lives, it's easy to see that engagement would support an overall sense of well-being. And well-being is this whole, hey, I'm generally content, generally happy doing what I'm doing. I feel like my life is going along in the right directions. I am thriving is another way to put it. Thriving is a synonym for this notion of well-being. And so, as I alluded to, we would generally think, work being such a big part of life, that the two things would go together. In other words, that there would be a pretty significant correlation between employee engagement and well-being of people who are employees. And that if the engagement were to fall off, then we would sort of expect the well-being to fall off as well, just because if we're not doing well at work, then that typically influences the rest of our lives as well. Again, because the huge investment in time that we make in our work. Now, before I get to Gallup's conclusion, I will say that Gallup is important research because they also look at the various work styles. And when they say work styles, what they mean is remote versus in-office types of works. They have different work styles that they identify. The three primary work styles that come into play here are not remote capable workers, meaning people that are in the service business or people that have to lay their hands on the factory or on the equipment that's there at the office, right? People who are remote only, which means people that salespeople that are out there on the road and just never in the office. And then in between is this notion of remote capable, meaning that there are people that could easily do their work outside of the office, but they're in this swing zone of current management challenges around work from home. And so remote capable people usually wind up a couple of days a week in the office. And the definitions vary a little bit depending on who you ask. So that's where work style factors in. So what Gallup is currently reporting is that for a particular segment of workers, the correlation between engagement and well-being has broken. In other words, for a certain class of workers, this is remote-only workers, that engagement has gone up somewhat, but well-being has gone down somewhat. And this flies in the face of us thinking that, well, work from home makes people happier. It's got a convenience to it. It should enhance their lives overall. But if their well-being has gone down and it's not caused by their engagement going down as well, then that's really interesting. So remote workers are now increasingly engaged in work, but increasingly reporting that they're not thriving as much. And so I find that to be a really fascinating finding from Gallup. And so the reason that I wanted to get into it is, first of all, we need to know that. So if we're banging the drum for work from home, hey, it's not all roses. You know, the grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence. And just anecdotally, I saw this when we first went home with COVID, and I'll deal with this more later. People didn't have a workspace in their houses, and they didn't have opportunities for childcare. And it was obvious that they were not thriving, that their well-being was totally out of kilter because they're trying to balance a 2-year-old on one knee sitting on the corner of their bed and balancing their laptop on their nightstand and using it with one hand to have remote meetings. And this is not a recipe for well-being or engagement. But we'll get into that a little bit more as we proceed. Now, when we look at that broken correlation, of course, I've explained it. What it means is that engagement is going up and well-being is going down. And I think that's the challenge. So in this episode, we'll talk about why I think that is, what might be missing, and oh, by the way, what can you do about it if you're a remote worker and you want to preserve your well-being while your engagement goes up. So when we look at remote work and work from home generally, we want to think about how did we get here and whether or not work from home is a perk. And I said before, I think most people consider it a perk, but it's been a challenging topic from my first awareness of the whole idea of work from home. So we go back a decade or two, then we see that the people that worked outside of the office were largely, as I said before, salespeople, on the road salespeople. And their business was to be on customer sites. And to the degree that they needed to do reporting and they needed to be managed and these kinds of things, those things were typically done every once in a while through phone calls, through submitted paper reports, through these means, rather than expecting them to be in the office on a real consistent basis for several hours a week. Now, during my time in the management career, I managed programmers. And at this point in the IT space, it began to be obvious that the technology would support the people that worked for me working from home because we were doing connectivity things, networking things. Everybody had, well, not everybody, but certainly people that were programmers for a living also tended to be computer hobbyists. So they had decent hardware at home. And so it was very clear that they could work from home. So in the programming space, at least, work from home predates the big explosion, which was the first months of COVID. But even then, the ability to do it, work from home was rare, which signifies the notion that managers still tend to perceive work from home as just an opportunity to slack off and be unproductive. I think that there is a little bit of wisdom in that, and we'll try to suss out how much wisdom that there was there. But work from home was rare, and we even proved it because in emergencies in the programming space, we would expect people to occasionally log in from home. If something happened overnight, or if there was, say, some, natural, I won't say natural disaster, but a natural challenge. I live in the South, so if there was big snowfall, then people with power would be able to log in remotely and we'd be able to take care of a few things here and there. Just keep the lights on. Now, when COVID happened, all of a sudden, corporate leadership had no choice but to change their minds about the capacity of people to work from home. And they were throwing technology at people and giving everybody laptops and connectivity and saying, no, you'll be fine. Work from home. It'll be fine. And that's interesting. It's not terribly surprising because that's the only way work was going to get done. In many places, as you'll recall, it was illegal, more or less, to have people come into the office in many areas of the country. And so leadership really had no choice except to send people home with some technology and say, hey, we can do this. You'll be great. Don't worry about it. Well, everything was, sunshine and roses for a period of time. And then the epidemic subsided and it became more socially acceptable for people to gather and be in their office. And then management started saying, okay, well, we now have gone back to our belief that work from in the office is more productive. And so we're going to ask you to come back into the office, although 6 months or a year ago, we asked you to go home and your productivity would be fine. So this debate on work from home continues and it goes back and forth. Unfortunately, I don't see any real data on the productivity of people who are working from home. Nothing clear has emerged like with Gallup. And I think this is mostly because we don't have good measures of productivity. But anyway, we'll drill down into that a little bit more as we go. So it's unfortunately, I think it's based on opinion, and it's this raging debate, and people get heated on both sides, and it's not good for people, and it's not good for business. Now, when we drill down on the productivity question, without really dealing with whether or not people can be productive working from home, I certainly think people can be productive working from home. I think they can be just as productive as they are in the office, if not more so. I do think that there are different challenges to that. Certainly a technical challenge, but we've learned how to face that and it's not expensive, but also cultural challenge, work style challenges, those kinds of things. But I think it's fair to assume that a more engaged employee is going to be more productive. If for no other reason than got a good attitude about it, less upset about the work to be done, and hey, let's get this thing done in a positive mental attitude about the work. Now, this is important because when we look at remote work, there's a high correlation between remote work and knowledge work. So I think engagement has a lot to do with productivity. I think that remote work, the people who are remote capable tend to be knowledge workers. And so I think this is an important topic as we look at the productivity of knowledge work. So engagement is high, productivity should be good, and then it's knowledge work productivity that we're talking about. And so that's why this is important to me and in this podcast, because we're all about the productivity of knowledge workers. When engagement is up, we feel like our work is energizing, promising, positive, dare I say, fun. Our work can be fun. Now, when we get out into this psychological profile of productivity, if you will, what does psychology say about productivity? That usually manages to work through motivation. Sometimes it's ability, but it usually has to do, when psychologists are talking about work, they're usually talking about motivation. And we do know, we have great evidence to support the notion that autonomy is positive to motivation. In other words, when we feel like we have control over when we do what, when we work and when we take breaks, how late into the evening or early in the morning we get to work, that autonomy tends to be useful to motivation, which should be correlated with productivity. So we're looking at a group of things, right? So remote workers tend to be knowledge workers. We're talking about the engagement of remote workers. Remote work, there's evidence that remote work produces more autonomy, and thus that should be useful to motivation, and thus raise the level of engagement generally. And so all these things are kind of correlated a little bit. And then when we look at the other component of this puzzle, which is well-being, then certainly I think the argument for work from home by employees is it will enhance my overall well-being. Employees don't tend to make the direct productivity argument, although some will make that argument. Most will say, I'll be better off because I'll be happier, and if I'm happier, then I'll do better work. These kinds of ideas are out there floating around. And I certainly think that engagement and well-being should be the outcomes of solid productivity practices. We've talked about this before. We've talked about calm productivity. We've talked about stress minimization around our work. And those things certainly correlate with engagement and thriving. So then we begin to see why there's this challenge of seeing well-being and engagement, see that correlation break. And so trying to explain what that is, what's the problem that they're not correlated? Is it something environmental or is it something else? And I certainly think that one of the challenges of work from home is this notion of isolation. Now, from an organizational, from a managerial standpoint, that isolation results in lack of motivation. And management models include the idea that if I can see you, I can tell whether or not you're working, and that keeps you motivated to be working. And so there's a be in the office so you'll do more work consistently kind of thing going on in most managers' mind, in my opinion. But anecdotally, as we were talking about work from home, what we generally found among management thinkers, even though they couldn't prove it, they couldn't demonstrate it, most management thinkers believe that your best people, if you send them home, will do better. And your worst people, if you send them home, will do worse. And so that's this anecdotal piece and trying to figure that out. So, I think what we find is, well, isn't this odd, right? Here's why we want to explore this, because we want to have high productivity. And if these two things are out of correlation, then what could be causing it? And what do we do to fix it? Now, I'm going to trace all this back to the idea of management. And we think about what is management, what is good management, and what is average management. And I think we can drill down into that. I certainly think that management is good for us. I don't necessarily mean that having a boss is good for us, but I do think that management is good for us. I think accountability is good for us. But I also think that there are a lot of people who think that personal agency and freedom are the highest values. And there are many people who think the mere idea that they have somebody telling them what to do, a boss, somebody who holds them accountable, they think that whole idea is bad and interferes with their freedom. Now, freedom, agency, fine. I think they're good things. But are they the most productive for us? And so my hypothesis here is that in order to achieve our greatest levels of productivity, that we need accountability and good management. And if you've heard the podcast, that shouldn't come as a surprise to you. I think that's what good management is all about, is promoting productivity. Now, when we look at management, there's an argument for minimizing it, and I kind of alluded to this a minute ago, and many companies have tried to eradicate management or get rid of it or whatever. And it really, psychologically, it falls down to this notion of intrinsic motivation as compared to extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is, I love my job, so I'm going to do it well. Extrinsic motivation is, I'm afraid I'll get fired, so I'm going to do my job well. And this debate goes back and forth, but most psychologists would say, oh, intrinsic motivation beats extrinsic motivation all the time. It's not even close. And so for that reason, we need to decrease the levels of management in the world. I will say it's interesting because we have significant anecdotal evidence that when people are trying to achieve a goal, if they publish that goal and their efforts, then they tend to be much more successful in achieving it. And that publication of that goal, what could that possibly be other than the pursuit of some accountability from a peer group? So when we publish the goals, we're getting accountability from our peer group, and that means that we don't want to let them down. So we're more motivated to pay attention to our goal and pursue it. Okay. There's plenty of other evidence around this notion of accountability. I've posted before the services that your boss does for you. It's a good thing to have a good boss and to have somebody that helps you be accountable. And there are other benefits, but accountability is one of those things. Also, push comes to shove, it's somebody that can help you prioritize your work if you get stuck. And that can be a shortcut. Hey, boss, what's the priority here? But we do have lots of bad managers in the world, and they're bad managers. They're just poorly trained. They're not evil people. There is very little, in my mind, good training on management. And add to that the fact, and I'm on record with this as well, that our promotion habits from individual producer to management/leader, our promotion habits are just sad. And so we wind up getting, this cadre of managers who are not really drawn to it, not trained in it, and thus, it's easy to see why we might have some less than stellar management going on. But all of these things pile up, and there's this notion of, well, I think management should be minimized in the world. And a lot of people that want to work from home, that's really one of their motivations, is to be more free and to be more autonomous. And it's just the presumption that having a manager, having a boss is a bad thing. So when we look at the work from home scenario, then do we find that levels of management actually decrease? And I think it's fair to say that they do. Certainly, as we become independent contractors, if you were to make the shift from employee to independent contractor, one of the first things that would happen would be you would no longer be told what to do, when to do it, or how. You would be engaged in a contract, and it would be pointed at results rather than activity. Okay, so we do see that. And to the degree that work from home correlates, then I think there's less management. And certainly there's an out of sight, out of mind notion. I mean, managers are busy people. And if you're not clamoring for their attention, then they're probably not giving you very much attention. And then finally, our common managerial models, at least, are not oriented very well towards managing somebody you can't see. Now, I think that this lack of management that happens in work from home, far from it being a good thing because of autonomy and because of our own agency, I think it's a negative. And just to give you my hypothesis, I really think that's why well-being is going down while engagement is going up. I think that we recognize that our self-management is probably not where it ought to be. And as our engagement goes up, it's hard to say what the exact mechanism might be, but maybe our work hours go up. Maybe we care more and we recognize that our productivity is not where it ought to be. Maybe there's higher frustrations about trying to get better at our work, any number of things here. But I do think that this well-being component is probably reflecting the challenge of self-management. So I believe in some ways employees are just used to having a boss or a manager. And thus, and I alluded to this in the previous episode on why it's good to have a manager, that we sort of fall in as employees, we just sort of fall into this mindset of being managed. And we don't think about it too much other than to think, well, I wish this person would get off my back, right? But there's some evidence that this self-management thing, which is what would be necessary in a work from home relationship, right? If you're out of sight, out of mind from your manager and your boss and your leader, then what's required is for you to manage yourself. And if you're not able to do that, then things are gonna get out of hand. And while your interest and engagement in the job, well, I'm happy about my job, might go up, then the implications for the rest of your lifestyle. Well, I'm more stressed about my task list, or I'm more concerned about whether the organization is forgetting about me, or any of these sorts of things might show up in the well-being side of the equation. Recently, I've been hearing a phrase or a meme from younger adults in their, say, 30s. And the meme or the phrase is adulting is hard, or I don't feel like adulting today. Now, as the parent of 24-year-old children who are just starting their independence, I hate this phrase. I can't imagine any situation where that would be true. But we do get away from being managed and directed by other people into needing to manage and direct ourselves. Now, this is in life, not just in work. And it's when we transition out of our parents' houses into our own independent lives that this tends to come up. And then kids show up and people really get upset about this whole notion of adulting is hard. And it's perhaps it is. But it annoys me to continually hear about it. And cynically, I will say that it is always easier to complain about somebody else not managing you well than it is to manage yourself well. So it's much easier to have a boss and complain about a boss than it is to not have a boss and be happy with the level of management that you're giving yourself. Now, could people be saying self-management is hard? Maybe, but that's simply because we're not trained in it. So that's where this comes in the absence of strong leadership in our lives, like the kind of leadership we would get from a directive boss. Can we lead ourselves? Now, in school, we don't learn how to be leaders. We learn how to be employees. This is generally agreed. We're not leaders, but we're followers based on what we're taught at school. And even people typically with managerial titles are not taught how to manage. Even people with formal managerial roles are not taught. They just kind of pick it up as legend and lore. And the interesting part is that self-management is not terribly different from management of other people. There are huge similarities between the two ideas. Now, again, I go back to this whole adulting is hard business, and what do we think about, managing ourselves and, how we deal with that. Some pieces of evidence on the similarities between self-management and management in the organization. We have long understood that the best manager in the organization is somebody who manages their own affairs well. And so it's actually the other way around. It's not that people that are trained managers of others are also trained to be good self-managers. It's that good self-managers tend to be good managers of other people. And they have tactics for holding accountability that equally apply to other people as well as to ourselves. And so there's big evidence that there's similarities there. And management is all about managing the trade-offs in the world and building relationships with people and helping motivate them to do what they should be doing. And so I believe that what we're seeing here in these Gallup results is this notion of self-management. If you're forced to work remotely, then you're relying on yourself to motivate, to always prioritize. You don't have as much of a fallback on a boss. Now, why is this important in a productivity podcast? Well, managing our tasks and our attention is a significant notion when we talk about self-management. Managing ourselves means managing our tasks and attention and motivation. And that's where all this is. I mean, after all, and I've mentioned this other podcast episode that you can refer to, good management is helpful. The notion of management, good management, is support the employees as they do the work, give them the support that they need. So the best models of management are the manager as coach models. I'm not beating you over the head with something. I'm helping you attain your goals. Now, we don't have a good model for doing that to ourselves, just like we don't have a good model for doing it in the organization. But when we look at self-management, the fact that we don't have a good model for it, evidence is the huge growth in private coaching and in life coaching, and people paying coaches to provide something in their lives. And in a very significant sense, hiring a coach is just like hiring a manager. We hire them because they believe that they can support and help us along the way towards whatever what we're doing. We're not hiring them to hit us over the head with a stick. Although if you have a fitness trainer at your gym, maybe you are hiring them to hit you over the head with a stick. But this growth indicates that this is something that we view as being challenging for us to do ourselves. And so we outsource it to people that we think are better at it than we are. And I think this is evidence that there is some secret sauce to that accountability piece, that external accountability piece. And perhaps there are other factors in play as well. And then certainly this rise in coaching as something that people engage in, private coaching is something people engage in, is occurring at the same time as this increase in remote work and the increase in knowledge work, both of which at least theoretically correlate with a reduction in this kind of direct formal managerial authority that we were used to seeing 50 years ago. And so when we're looking at this situation, so the first takeaway is, okay, let's think about work from home. And if you choose to work from home, if you have the option and you choose to work from home, or you ask to work from home, then recognize that you're probably going to face this challenge unless your management is just really well trained and really good at what they do. Then you're probably going to shoulder some of this burden yourself, if for no other reason than out of sight, out of mind, and you don't have that same level of peer accountability that you've once had. And that I want to make you aware of so that you can think it through and begin to recognize the possibility that if you're not good at these things, then working from home, working remotely could be a negative in your well-being, so to speak. And it could force you into a challenge that, quite frankly, you're not yet trained to deal with. So that's why I'm here. Okay. And what this podcast is about. We're exploring this idea of self-management because that's what knowledge workers need to be able to do. And a big component of that is this mindset. It's recognizing that we need to manage ourselves, that we can't just go off the deep end if we have the opportunity to work from home. And in the podcast, we talk about models of self-management and models of knowledge work management. And I certainly think the management of our tasks and attention is a big part of it. Perhaps the overwhelming majority of that. But we do also get into other ideas that show up in management. I think confidence is a big one. A good coach, and thus a good manager, would be somebody that inspires confidence in us as we go about these tasks. It would be somebody that helps us understand that, yes, we can do it. Yes, we can get better at it, but yes, we can do it. And so I think confidence is a big piece there. And I think good management has that. And so can we self-manage our way into a real sense of confidence? And I've done a couple of podcasts on this as well. I think good managers are very much about helping us increase our skill level. Good coaches, good managers really want us to get better at what we're doing. So that confidence and that seeking to improve in our jobs are things that we're going to have to take on ourselves as we become self-managers. And there's information about all this. I'll show you what the thinking is around that in these other podcast episodes. They're not hard to find. And then the ultimate goal of the Do Busy Right podcast is for engagement and well-being to go up together. I both want you to be better at what you do, and engagement is shown to be at least somewhat driven by mastery, being good at it, but also for your well-being to go up. And I don't think that getting better at work necessarily needs to raise our stress. In fact, I think the exact opposite. So I do think that that's what we're about here. So I want us to take a much closer look. So be introspective and ask yourself these questions and look at your own need for, and I'm going to use the word management. And by that, I mean positive management. I mean coaching. I mean somebody to support you and help you move in the right direction. So take a close look at that in your job and also in non-dollar oriented work that you do. And let's think about this, but a gentle word of warning about work from home, which is you're going to be faced with this challenge and it is very stressful, but also so that you can be prepared and begin to work on your self-management skills, which are learnable and doable. And as I say, I think the majority, the lion's share of self-management has to do with task and attention management. If you've been trained in the management of others, then it's a little bit simpler because now all you need to do is to recognize that those skills that you've applied to other people, you now need to apply to yourself. And this is probably already happening in your work. So maybe that's a little bit easier for you. So we'll do a recap and we'll see where we're at. So the whole thing is driven by this challenge to the notion of work from home, which is Gallup's evidence that engagement is going up and well-being is going down. And in an effort to explain this, I think it has to do with a lack of management in the work from home scenario. And I think that people who lack this management feel it as, well, I'm not doing as well as I once did, despite the fact that they report that they're happier about their jobs generally. And so I think it's sort of a hidden trap here. And so we talked about it. We talked about why we think management would be less, what would we say, developed in a work from home scenario. And we talked about the fact that managers are really not trained very well. Management models are not adopted very well. And the ones that we do have tend to be highly challenged by a lack of visibility. In other words, the bad management models that are the ones that are usually in place really are challenged by the fact that there's not eyeball to eyeball contact for 40 plus hours a week. And so when we get out into this thing, managers sometimes don't want their employees to go work from home. And quite frankly, if the self-management challenge is what I believe it to be, they may very well be right. There are other factors as well, but I do think that work from home is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for employees. I think it's a good thing for companies. And I think that if we have work from home experiments that fail, i.e. engagement goes up, but well-being goes down, then that's going to hurt the notion of work from home. And I think that with better management models and better management practice, including self-management, then I think we'll be both more engaged and have higher levels of well-being as we work from home. And oh, by the way, learning how to manage yourself is the best practice for learning how to manage and lead others in the workplace. As you well know, I'm available to consult about this or to coach around these ideas. Certainly, I think that task and attention management is high on the scale of self-management tactics and self-management skills. And certainly that's where the attention compass is aimed. So when I say, hey, you should look into attention compass, I do mean it as a self-management tool, because that's what it's intended to be. And to put us as knowledge workers in the possession of tools such that our productivity is as high as it can be while we're sort of this independent, lonely knowledge worker type. So I think this is an interesting finding from Gallup and one that I wanted to bring to you. And I think that if we look into this as an opportunity to really work on our self-management, then I think we'll find that strengthening our self-management puts us in a much better position to do busy right. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.